Hello, it is so good to be with you again to talk to you about the subject of evangelism and trying to encourage us to be able to get out and evangelize in this 21st century. We are in chapter 8 of our workbooks. This is lesson number 21. Chapter 8 is trying to keep the saved saved. How do you stay a Christian? One of the things that drive people away from God is a subject of suffering. Something may happen that's not so pleasant in their lives, something tragic. And because of that, they don't understand and they are driven away from God. If you're dealing with a person like that, you might want to take them to this study. So let's talk about the subject of suffering for a minute. Every person in the world from the beginning of time has asked the question, why do people suffer? When we get into the study, I think we need to look at where did suffering start at? Where was its beginnings at? So if you would, look at page 163, Suffering. Can anything good come from it? When did suffering start? Suffering shows up the first time in the Garden of Eden. It's not until after Adam and Eve broke God's law, sin, that we see the first signs of suffering. And what do we see there? We see an increase of pain and childbearing, possibly a struggle between the man and the woman in the marriage. The ground is cursed, sweat and pain is caused from hard work, and people will eventually die. When sin was ushered into the world, it brought the consequences of suffering with it. The best that I can tell, before sin came along, suffering did not exist on this earth. Unfortunately, we are born into a world drenched in sin, and because of that, we cannot escape the grips of pain and suffering. Sin always produces bad consequences. If it didn't, we might fall in love with this world too much. Let's look at some stories in the Bible on suffering. One of the things that we're going to discover about the Bible is that it tells it like it is about the people that are written within it. Nothing is hidden or prettied up. God is up front with their failures, with their mistakes, with their sin, and yes, even their pain. When dealing with suffering, not even Jesus could escape it. Let's look at some examples of suffering within the pages of the Bible. We can't talk about suffering without talking about a man named Job. We see, when Job shows up in the Bible, we see that he was a man that feared God and shunned evil. Satan shows up on the scene and tells God that the only reason that Job serves you is because you have, in a sense, page 164, have protected him so well. Satan is convinced that if God was to strike down Job and the things that mean the most to him, that Job would no longer serve God. So God gives Satan permission to cause Job some problems. Job's oxen and donkey are carried away by raiders, and the servants that cared for them were killed, all except one. Next, fire fell from the sky and burned up all of Job's sheep and those taking care of them, except for one. Then raiders took away all of Job's camels and killed the servants that watched over them, all except one. And if that were not enough, as these three servants bring these messages back to Job, he gets one more man to come to him to bring him a message. All of Job's children were killed due to a wind collapsing the house that they were meeting in. Job then broke out with great sores all over his body. Here you have a man of God who greatly suffered. Would you agree? The Lord's prophet Jeremiah is another example. After doing all that God asked him to do, this is God's man, this is God's prophet. He was faithful. He was beaten and put into stocks in the temple courts, Jeremiah 20. After years of persecution, he was beaten again and thrown into a dungeon in a hole under a man's house and left there for a very long time, Jeremiah 37. And shortly after that, he was placed into a muddy cistern in the court of the guard, left there to die, Jeremiah 38. Would you agree that we have a man of God who who is greatly suffering? Yes. Another example that we could look at is found in with the early church. One of the best evangelists and preachers of the church, Stephen, was stoned to death. Acts chapter 7. Then such a great persecution broke out against the church that all the Christians had fled Jerusalem for their very lives. Acts chapter 8. Not long after that, the Apostle James had his head cut off by King Herod. That's Acts chapter 12. Other Christians were in prison while some were being killed. Would you agree that the Lord's church is suffering? Yes. In fact, even Jesus, prior to the cross, sat all alone in the garden because his apostles could not stay awake with him. His very best friends would not stay awake. Jesus knew that in just a few hours all the world would be against him, including one of his own, Judas. His apostles would abandon him at his weakest moment. He would be beaten, spit upon, flogged, ridiculed, hated, crucified, and even had his side tore out with a spear. And Jesus asked his Father, "Why? Why have you forsaken me?" Even the Son of God suffered. Why do God's faithful suffer? I can almost understand why the ungodly suffer. Sin is a powerful negative in our world, and it carries with it a lot of painful results. But what about Christians? Why do God's people suffer? I know you as a Christian have asked this question. Let's look at Isaiah chapter 55. Isaiah 55, verse 8 through 11. There's some powerful and very deep words. God says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are neither your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. As for the rain and the snow that come down from heaven, and do not return but water the earth, making it bring forth sprout, giving seed to the sower, and bread to the eater, so shall my word that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish what I purpose, and it shall succeed in the things for which I sent it." God's ways are not our ways. I mean, if you were to ask me how this world should operate and how things should go, I might have a different plan. God says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are higher than your ways." He wants some things achieved so that his purposes can be reached. And here's what he wants accomplished in our lives. I want you to see this. What is he after? What does he want accomplished in our lives? James chapter 1, verse 2. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." God wants his children to become mature and complete. And how is that achieved? Through trials and the testing of our faith. God says there's no way around it. It just has to be that way. Yet how can God expect us to have joy in the midst of our painful trials? The best way that I can explain it is that joy does not come at the beginning, but it comes as a result of our trials. A mother's face is not filled with joy during the pain of childbirth. But when she has the finished product in her arms, despite all that struggle and pain, nothing but joy comes to her face as she looks into the eyes of that beautiful baby. Through pain and suffering, there is a growth that takes place that cannot be achieved in any other way. The things that we learn along the path of these trials cannot be achieved if we are surrounded by lollipops and fuzzy little puppy dogs running through our hair all day long. Trials, sufferings, and pain produces faith, hope, and trust. Suffering, pain, and struggles are God's finest hour. This is where man comes closest to seeing and understanding the heart of God. Looking at these 4 examples here of suffering in the Bible, I think we need to see the big picture. We need to see the complete story. So let's look at the end result. Let's look at Job for a minute. If you go to the end of the book of Job, chapter 42, Job says, I had heard of you by the hearing of my ear, but now I see you with my eyes. Page 166. Although Job was a God-fearing, upright man, through the trials that he endured, he reached a closeness to God that he had not seen prior to his suffering. Isn't that interesting? God then blessed Job with more children, with more money, and with more riches. Watch this. God's purpose was fulfilled. When speaking about Jeremiah, right? Here's Jeremiah. Watch what happens to Jeremiah. No one would listen to him. He kept telling them over and over again, the Israelites, that Babylon was going to come in and lay siege to them, and they need to give themselves over, and nobody would listen to that. They gave him such a hard time, persecuted him over and over and over again. Now watch what happens when the Babylonians come into town. Jeremiah 40, verse 1. The word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord after Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, had let him go from Ramah. When he took him, bound him in chains along with all the captives of Jerusalem and Judah, who were being exiled to Babylon. The captain of the guard took Jeremiah and said to him, the Lord your God pronounced this disaster against this place. And he did. The Lord has brought it about and has done as he said. Because you sinned against the Lord and did not obey his voice, this thing has come upon you. Now behold, he's talking to Jeremiah, I release you today from the chains of your hands. If it seems good for you to come with me to Babylon, come. I'll look after you well. But if it seems wrong to you to come to me to Babylon, do not come. See, the whole land is before you. Go wherever you think it good and right to go. If you remain, then return to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, whom the king of Babylon appointed governor of the cities of Judah, and dwell with him among the people, or go wherever you think it right to go. So the captain of the guard gave him an allowance of food and a present, and let him go. Can you see it? Here's all the Israelites, and they're all in chains, and they're all being hauled away into slavery. All these people that wouldn't listen. And what happens to Jeremiah? He's let go, and he is blessed. Jeremiah saw God's power and blessings fulfilled in his life. He saw the power of God. God's purpose was fulfilled. How about the church of the first century? Here they are being persecuted, right? And in Acts chapter 8, verse 4, what does it say? Those who had been scattered because of persecution, maybe just a clothes on their back, preached the word wherever they went. The first century church had not fulfilled the commission that God had given them to take the gospel out into all the world. They were stagnant, and they remained in Jerusalem. They stayed in Jerusalem because this is where the apostles are, this is where the church is. It's secure, it feels good. Due to the persecution they endured, it forced the church out into the rest of the world, and the message of God's grace went with them. As for the great preachers and apostles that lost their lives, God raised up more to fill their shoes. The church grew and matured through its trials. Watch this. God's purpose was fulfilled. And then let's speak about Jesus. Hebrews chapter 7, verse 9. What does it say about Jesus? In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, watch this, he learned obedience through what he suffered. And being made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. Hebrews 12 verse 2, Look to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. For the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and was seated at the right hand of the throne of God. I don't know how you would teach anything to the Son of God. And yet Jesus learned obedience through what he suffered. Without Jesus being obedient, there would be no cross and there would be no resurrection. We should all fall on our knees and praise God for Jesus' obedience. He never sinned, not one time. We need to understand that Jesus only learned these things through suffering. Jesus taught us what it was to trust the Father. He also taught us the meaning of hope, which was found in the resurrection. Jesus perfects and completes our faith. Jesus was faithful unto death. God's purpose was fulfilled. Let me conclude with this. 2 Corinthians. Watch what Paul writes here. Chapter 4, verse 7. But we have this treasure in jars of clay, to show that the surpassing power belongs to God, not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Chapter 4, verse 13. Since we have the same spirit of faith, according to what has been written, I believe, therefore I spoke. We also believe, so we also speak, knowing that he who raised Jesus, the Lord Jesus, will raise us also with Jesus to bring us with you into his presence. We believe, therefore we speak. That's what we speak. Verse 16. So we do not lose heart. Though our outer nature is being wasted away, our inner nature is being renewed day by day. For the slight momentary afflictions is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. As we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transparent, but the things that are unseen are eternal. Page 168. I don't know what God is going to do with each of us on an individual level, but think of it like this. We are a dirty, smelly lump of clay on a potter's wheel. Nothing much to look at least not at first. God is the potter. He starts to mold and shape us, taking the bad spots out, throwing them to the floor. He pulls, he pushes on us. It hurts, and we ask him to stop. Please stop. This is hard. Yet he keeps on going through the months and the years and the decades. Then one day the wheel stops and the Creator steps back. What does he find? but a beauty that shines like the stars of heaven, made in the image of our Creator. God has a plan for all of us. And that plan is to grow and mature us. God has to get us ready for that fight against Satan. He needs people to set a good example in this world for Him. And we need to be that light that reflects the light of Jesus in this dark and lonely world. God's preparing His people for glory, for His glory. Do I understand it all? No. Do I have questions? All the time. I'm going to leave you with two verses that help me get through those tough days. And sometimes just about all of them are tough. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 19. 1 Peter 4:19. Watch this verse. Therefore let those who suffer according to God's will entrust their souls to a faithful Creator while doing good. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that for those who love God, all things work to what? The good. For those who are called according to His purpose. I look at it this way, looking at 1 Peter 4:19. If God is okay with me suffering, then I'm okay with that. Isn't that what the verse said? According to His will. And the reason I'm okay with that is because I know that I'm not just out here spinning around like just going in every direction. Knowing that whatever happens to me happens according to His will. My Lord is involved with my life. He assures me that no matter what happens, it will work out for the good of those who are called according to His purpose. And because of that, I'm okay with that. I hope this has helped. Just remember this. We are one day closer to heaven than we were yesterday. We are moving towards the goal. I know this is a deep subject, but there are people out here who have left the church. They've become Christians, they've been baptized, and they leave Jesus because they don't understand suffering. Show them in the Bible that God does have a purpose in suffering, and show them that He is ultimately in control and that He is with them. And we can learn some things through suffering. And if you're dealing with a person that's not a Christian, and they may be staying away from God because of suffering that they have seen in their lives or in others' lives, take them through this study. I hope this study has helped both us to understand and also to get those that are lost to understand. May God bless you. Let's go win some souls for Jesus. We'll see you next time.